Rain stitched the window into a trembling veil, and the room smelled faintly of old paper and extinguished incense. Like a place that had been waiting longer than anyone remembered, a single candle held its ground against the dark, its flame bending each time thunder spoke in the distance. On the table, a book lay open, not as an object, but as an invitation and a warning. Here is the question that has followed humanity like a shadow that learns our footsteps. Why does truth so often arrive behind a gate? Not the everyday kind of truth. Names, dates, facts you can repeat, but the kind that changes a person's center of gravity. The kind that makes you feel, even for a moment, that you are larger than your conditioning, that you are not merely a role, a label, a citizen, a consumer, a follower. The kind that makes obedience feel strangely expensive. If you listen closely to history, you can hear it. The same pattern repeating through empires, temples, schools, and secret circles. A portion for the many, a portion for the few. And always the same justification whispered with soft hands. Protection, readiness, order. As if wisdom were a fire that must be controlled. As if the soul were a child that must be supervised. Yet something doesn't add up. Because there are moments, quiet, personal, almost embarrassing in their simplicity, when a person touches a fragment of the hidden and instantly recognizes it, not as new information, but as an old memory returning, a line in a forgotten text, a symbol carved into stone, a parable that hits the chest before it reaches the mind, a dream that leaves you awake for hours, not afraid, but strangely lucid. And in that recognition, a second question rises. If this belongs to everyone, why has it been rationed like luxury? Somewhere in the world right now, someone is being told what to believe. Somewhere else, someone is being punished for asking the wrong question. Somewhere else, someone is being entertained into forgetting they ever had a soul that could question anything at all. And in the middle of all this noise, the oldest system keeps functioning, not always as a conspiracy, not always as a villain, but as a structure. Levels, permissions, inner doors, outer performances. The candle flutters. The book's page lifts slightly as if breathing. You notice the margin is filled with tiny marks. Circles, lines, an eye-shaped curve. Symbols that look decorative until the moment they don't. And you begin to sense what initiates have always known. The system is not only out there in institutions and traditions, it is also inside you, because the first gate is never guarded by soldiers. It is guarded by comfort, by fear, by the desire to remain who you've been told you are. And once you see that, the question becomes unavoidable. What if the secret was never just hidden from you, but hidden within you, waiting for the version of you who is finally ready to notice? The two truths, outer myth, inner key. A bell rings somewhere beyond the walls, not loud enough to command attention, only precise enough to divide the moment into before and after. In ancient worlds, this sound marked the passage from the visible to the unseen. To most ears, it was merely ritual. To a few, it was a signal that a second language was being spoken beneath the first. Every civilization carried two truths at once. One was spoken openly, shaped into stories, rules, and customs that could be shared without risk. The other moved quietly, wrapped in symbol, gesture, and silence. The outer truth taught people how to live together. The inner truth taught them how to live from within. Confusion began when the outer story was mistaken for the whole. There is an old teaching attributed to a Roman emperor who wrote not for an audience, but for his own conscience. He warned himself that no external power could rule a person who had learned to govern their inner world. Such a realization was never dangerous because it was abstract. It was dangerous because it worked. A person who discovers an inner center stops outsourcing meaning. They become harder to frighten, harder to herd, harder to convince that their worth depends on approval. A folktale from the East tells of a village that revered a map kept in a golden frame. They bowed before it, argued over it, even fought wars in its name. One day, a traveler asked where the road on the map actually led. The elders scolded him. "The map is sacred," they said. "It is not meant to be walked." The traveler smiled, brushed the dust from his feet, and replied, "Then you are not lost by accident." Psychological insight. The mind prefers symbols that explain life without requiring transformation. Myths can awaken, but they can also anesthetize. When meaning is handed down without invitation to verify it inwardly, it becomes a substitute for experience. Belief replaces insight. Obedience replaces understanding. This is why initiatory traditions never began with explanations. They began with preparation, with discipline, with humility, with the slow dismantling of certainty. The inner key was never information, it was readiness. Listen closely and you'll hear it even now. The same story can inspire one person and imprison another. The same symbol can open a door or become an idol. The difference is never the symbol itself. It is the level at which it is received. And here the system reveals its quiet genius. Nothing is hidden outright. Everything is shown, but not everything is seen. The myth is public. The key is personal. And the moment you begin to sense that a second meaning has been following you all along, another question begins to take shape in the dark. If the key has always been nearby, what has been training you not to reach for it? The temple that was also a machine stone remembers. It holds temperature, pressure, and intention long after voices fade. Step into an ancient corridor carved with deliberate angles, and you begin to feel it immediately. The way your breath slows, the way sound returns to you altered, the way your thoughts seem louder, heavier, less obedient. These structures were never designed as shelters alone. They were instruments, tuned with precision, built to act upon the human nervous system. In the initiatory centers of Egypt, learning did not begin with words. It began with exposure, light, shadow, proportion, silence. Each was arranged to disturb the ordinary rhythm of the mind. The initiate was not taught what to think, but placed inside an environment that made thinking itself impossible to hide from. Long corridors narrowed perception. Chambers amplified breath and heartbeat. Darkness was not symbolic, it was practical. When vision is taken away, the inner landscape asserts itself. There is a reason modern psychology recognizes awe as a force that reorganizes attention. Carl Jung observed that symbols are not decorations of the psyche, but living facts within it. When an initiate stood beneath a ceiling mapped to the stars, or walked a passage aligned with cardinal forces, something registered beneath conscious thought. The body received instruction before the mind could interfere. Imagine a novice led forward by torchlight, fasting, sleep-thinned, stripped of familiar references. The walls do not speak, yet something is being said. Fear rises, not as an enemy, but as information. The initiate discovers that the mind, when deprived of distraction, generates its own trials. Old memories surface. Hidden desires speak. The self that performs for society begins to fracture under its own weight. Psychological insight. When external noise is removed, unresolved material demands attention. This is why silence terrifies those who have never met themselves without mirrors. The initiatory systems understood this long before therapy had a name. They did not remove fear. They introduced it carefully, the way a physician introduces heat to cauterize a wound. Modern equivalents appear when someone enters solitude not by choice but by circumstance. Illness, exile, loss, and finds that the real struggle is not survival but honesty. The temple merely formalized this encounter. At a certain point in the passage, carvings appear. An eye, a measured spiral, a geometry that feels intentional without explaining itself. These are not lessons. They are confirmations. They say, without sound, that reality is structured, layered, responsive. And as the initiate moves forward, one understanding begins to crystallize, unsettling in its clarity. The temple is not separate from the one walking through it. It is a mirror. And whatever cannot pass through this space cannot pass forward at all. Atlantis as memory, not geography. The ocean keeps its secrets without effort. It does not argue with historians or defend itself against skepticism. It simply holds what has fallen into it and lets time do the rest. Atlantis appears in human memory the same way. Half submerged, half visible. Dismissed as fantasy precisely because it refuses to behave like ordinary history. But initiatory traditions were never concerned with geography alone. They spoke in layers. Atlantis was not merely a place. It was a state of coherence. A civilization remembered not for its buildings, but for its integration. Knowledge there was not divided into sacred and practical, spiritual and technical, inner and outer. Wisdom was lived, not stored. It shaped how people breathed, built, healed, and governed themselves. Plato did not present Atlantis as a fairy tale meant for escape. He presented it as a caution sealed inside a myth. A society that mastered forces of nature without mastering itself created imbalance. And imbalance, left uncorrected, always collapses inward before it collapses outward. The fall of Atlantis was not a punishment from the heavens. It was the consequence of forgetting what knowledge was for. There is a story from an old coastal tradition of a city that slowly lost its name. At first, only elders noticed. Then rituals continued without understanding. Songs were sung for reasons no one remembered. Eventually, the city still stood, but it no longer knew what it served. When the ground finally gave way, the people were shocked. Not because the fall was sudden, but because the forgetting had been gradual. Psychological insight. Civilizations, like individuals, suffer when memory fragments. When purpose dissolves, power fills the vacuum. Viktor Frankl observed that meaninglessness does not merely sadden the human spirit, it disorients it. Without a center, anything can become an idol. The initiatory lineage suggests that when Atlantis fell, survivors did not carry libraries. They carried fragments. Symbols, proportions, breathing methods, stories that encoded laws of consciousness. These fragments traveled into Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus, and beyond. Each culture preserved a piece, adapting it to its own language and limits. Over generations, the fragments hardened into systems. What was once fluid became formal. What was once lived became taught. And what was once understood as a responsibility became interpreted as a privilege. The whole was no longer visible, but the parts remained powerful enough to shape belief. This is why Atlantis persists, not because it waits to be rediscovered under the sea, but because it waits to be remembered within. It represents a question humanity keeps postponing. What happens when knowledge advances faster than inner maturity? And as that question echoes, another begins to surface, quieter but more dangerous. If a whole once existed and shattered into pieces, who learned to control the fragments? And what did they build with them? The price of fragmentation ink dries faster than memory. In a quiet chamber, a scribe bends over a table, copying sacred words with careful precision. Outside, people gather, waiting not for the text itself, but for permission to understand it. This moment, repeated across centuries, marks the turning point where wisdom begins to fracture into authority. Fragmentation did not arrive as violence. It arrived as management. As soon as knowledge proved capable of transforming the inner life, it became something to regulate. Not everyone was ready. Not everyone could be trusted. And so access narrowed. Layers were introduced. Interpretations were standardized. Meaning became something delivered rather than discovered. Viktor Frankl observed that when meaning is controlled externally, the human spirit weakens from the inside. A person who cannot orient themselves inwardly becomes dependent on borrowed narratives. They ask not, "What is true?" but "What am I allowed to believe?" This shift may seem subtle, but it changes everything. Responsibility moves outward. Power follows. There is a medieval story of a kingdom where only priests could read. The people were told the written word was dangerous, that it required special protection. Over time, the people stopped wanting to read at all. They began to say, "It is not for us." When the priests eventually abused their position, the people did not revolt. They had forgotten how. The lock was no longer on the door. It was in the mind. Psychological insight. When truth is fragmented, coherence collapses. The mind craves wholeness. If it cannot find it inwardly, it will cling to external structures, leaders, ideologies, systems that promise order. Fragmentation creates anxiety. Authority offers relief. This is how control becomes comforting. As knowledge splintered, the public received rituals without the inner process, commandments without the internal alignment, myths stripped of their transformative edge. Symbols became objects of worship instead of instruments of awakening. The inner journey was replaced by compliance. The initiate was replaced by the believer. Yet fragmentation had another effect. It ensured that no single group could see the whole. Fragments scattered across cultures. Mathematics in one place, mysticism in another, ethics somewhere else, prevented reintegration. Those who controlled the bridges between fragments controlled meaning itself. This is the price humanity paid. Not ignorance, but disconnection. Not darkness, but confusion disguised as certainty. And as centuries passed, the system refined itself. It learned that the most effective barrier is not force, but distraction. Not silence, but noise. And so the question sharpens, pressing closer to the present moment. If fragmentation was the strategy, what would it take for reintegration to occur? And why does the idea of wholeness feel so threatening to the world that inherited this broken map? Councils, edits, and the manufacture of orthodoxy. The room is filled with murmurs that never quite rise to argument. Candles burn low as men lean over tables heavy with scrolls, deciding not what is true, but what will be allowed to remain. Outside these walls, entire populations wait without knowing they are waiting. Inside, a quieter decision is being made. Which questions will survive? Orthodoxy is rarely announced as control. It presents itself as protection, as clarity, as the necessary trimming of dangerous excess. Jiddu Krishnamurti warned that the moment truth is organized, it begins to decay. Not because structure is evil, but because living insight resists containment. What cannot be pinned down must either be honored or eliminated. Too often, it is the latter. Across centuries, councils gathered to define doctrine, not through inner verification, but through agreement. Pages were removed, meanings narrowed, parables flattened into literal commands. What once pointed inward was redirected upward, toward authority. The result was not unity, but uniformity. And uniformity is easier to police. There is a story told among desert mystics of a well that once healed anyone who drank from it. When rulers discovered it, they built a wall around the well and appointed guards. Soon, the water was rationed. Eventually, the guards claimed the well only worked when blessed by them. Over time, people forgot the taste of the water altogether. They argued instead about the wall. Psychological insight. Humans fear uncertainty more than error. When a system offers certainty, even false certainty, it can feel like relief. Orthodoxy exploits this tendency. It replaces inner inquiry with external answers, relieving the individual of the burden of discernment. The cost is subtle but severe. Curiosity becomes suspicious. Doubt becomes immoral and insight becomes heresy. Yet repression never erases what it fears. It only forces it into disguise. As official doctrine hardened, wisdom slipped underground. It hid in symbols, poetry, coded language, and oral transmission. Those who sensed something missing learned to read between lines, to listen for resonance rather than permission. You can see this survival strategy everywhere, in myths that carry multiple meanings, in art that seems decorative until it unsettles you, in texts that disturb authorities precisely because they refuse to be finalized. The more rigid the doctrine became, the more creative the concealment had to be. This is how the initiatory current endured. Not by confronting power head-on, but by flowing beneath it. Like water beneath ice, it continued moving, waiting for cracks. And the deeper the repression, the more pressure built beneath the surface. Which raises a question that lingers like smoke in a closed room. If truth has always found a way to survive censorship, what forms did it take when words themselves became too dangerous to trust? The underground river. Codes, parables, disguises. When speech becomes risky, meaning learns to travel in disguise. Wisdom does not disappear under pressure, it changes shape. Like an underground river, it withdraws from the surface, carving its path through darkness, stone, and time, guided not by permission, but by necessity. As doctrines hardened and surveillance tightened, those who carried the initiatory current learned a crucial lesson. The safest truths are the ones that look harmless. A story told to children, a pattern woven into cloth, a painting that appears ornamental, a myth dismissed as fantasy. Beneath these forms, instruction continued, quiet, resilient, patient. A poet once wrote that some answers must wait for the life that can live them. This understanding shaped the way knowledge was transmitted. Instead of explanations, seekers were given parables. Instead of doctrines, they received symbols. Instead of commands, they encountered questions that echoed long after the telling ended. There is a story of a master who refused to answer a student's questions directly. Instead, he told a simple tale about a farmer and a cracked pot. Years later, when the student faced loss and humiliation, the meaning of the story surfaced on its own, precise and unavoidable. The master had not withheld truth. He had protected it from premature use. Psychological insight. The unconscious understands metaphor more readily than instruction. When a truth is wrapped in story, it bypasses resistance. It waits. It matures alongside the listener. This is why the most durable teachings are the least obvious. They allow time to do part of the work. Alchemists painted strange creatures not to confuse, but to encode processes of inner change. Mystics spoke in contradictions to keep literal minds at bay. Folk tales hid maps of consciousness inside adventures and trials. Even humor became a vessel. Laughter loosening defenses so insight could slip through unnoticed. This strategy did more than preserve knowledge. It filtered seekers. Those who demanded certainty grew impatient. Those who listened with curiosity stayed. Over time, the inner ear developed. The ability to sense coherence beneath surface absurdity. The initiate learned to read resonance instead of authority. You can still feel this mechanism at work today. A line in a book unsettles you without explanation. A story lingers longer than it should. An image refuses to be forgotten. These are not accidents. They are signals from the underground river, surfacing just long enough to be recognized. And once you realize that truth has been speaking in riddles, not to confuse but to survive, another realization follows, unsettling and intimate. If the language of initiation has always been symbolic, what happens when you begin to read your own life the same way? The symbol that activates the symbol does not ask to be believed. It asks to be encountered. This is why it survives where arguments fail. You can reject an idea, debate a doctrine, abandon a belief. But a true symbol follows you home. It appears in dreams, repeats in unexpected places, stirs something before thought can intervene. Long before it is understood, it is felt. Initiatory traditions never treated symbols as decorations. They were tools, precise, deliberate, alive. The labyrinth was not a puzzle for amusement. It was a map of inward movement, a way of teaching the body what the mind could not yet accept. The serpent was not a creature to fear, but a sign of vital force. The intelligence that moves upward when awareness is refined. The spiral traced the rhythm of expansion without end. The circle spoke of wholeness. The cross, long before it became a doctrine, marked the meeting point of inner and outer worlds. What makes a symbol dangerous to rigid systems is that it cannot be owned. It does not obey hierarchy. It speaks differently to each level of consciousness. A child sees a picture. A thinker sees a metaphor. An initiate experiences a shift. This flexibility is not weakness, it is protection. There is a Zen parable of a monk who stared at a single brushstroke for years. When asked what it meant, he replied, "At first, it meant nothing. Then it meant everything. Now it means exactly what it is." The symbol did not change, the perceiver did. Psychological insight. Symbols operate below language. They access the same inner territory as dreams, memory, and intuition. This is why they bypass resistance. You do not argue with a symbol, you resonate with it, or you don't. Either way, something registers. Modern life is filled with symbols stripped of depth, repeated until they lose their charge. But authentic symbols behave differently. They create pauses. They interrupt momentum. They invite contemplation without demanding conclusions. When you encounter one, time seems to slow, if only for a breath. Initiatory schools trained perception, not belief. Students learned to notice patterns, correspondences, recurrences. The world itself became a living script. Nothing was random, everything communicated, if one knew how to listen. This way of seeing transforms daily life. A repeated number, a recurring image, a chance meeting that feels oddly precise. These are not guarantees of meaning, but invitations to attention. When attention sharpens, reality responds differently. And here the quiet threshold appears. Because the moment you recognize that symbols are not relics of the past, but active forces in the present, a subtle responsibility emerges. If the world is speaking in this language, what is it asking you to hear now? Levels of consciousness. The staircase inside. Not all eyes see the same world, even when standing in the same place. Two people can witness the same event and walk away, carrying entirely different realities. This is not opinion, it is structure. Consciousness itself unfolds in levels, each one shaping what can be perceived, tolerated, and understood. Initiatory systems were built around this fact. They did not assume equality of perception, only equality of potential. A child cannot be taught mathematics meant for an engineer, not because the child is inferior, but because the inner instruments have not yet formed. In the same way, certain truths remain invisible until the inner architecture required to hold them has been constructed. Ancient teachings across cultures describe this staircase. At the lower levels, awareness is governed by instinct, survival, fear, craving, reaction. Life feels hostile or scarce. Meaning is outsourced. Authority feels necessary. In this state, symbols are taken literally, rules are clung to, and difference feels like threat. Much of humanity still lives here, not because they are broken, but because they have never been invited upward. As awareness matures, identity forms. Right and wrong become central. Belonging matters. The individual defines themselves through roles, beliefs, and affiliations. This stage brings order, but also rigidity. The world is divided into camps. Questions are allowed only within limits. Yet something important happens here. The first cracks appear. Doubt enters, not as rebellion, but as curiosity. A story from the East tells of a student who demanded the final teaching. The master handed him a mirror and said, "When you can look without flinching, return." The student left angry. Years later, after loss and failure, he understood. The mirror was not refusal, it was timing, psychological insight. Growth often arrives through disillusionment. When an identity no longer fits, suffering increases, not as punishment, but as pressure toward expansion. This is the point where many retreat, seeking comfort in certainty. Others move upward. At higher levels, awareness becomes inclusive. Opposites soften, compassion grows. Identity loosens its grip. The individual begins to sense connection rather than separation. Meaning is no longer borrowed, it is experienced. Here, symbols regain their depth. Parables open. Silence teaches. Beyond this, consciousness operates as a unified field. Intuition leads. Time feels less linear. The self is no longer the center of experience. Yet, it is not erased. It becomes an instrument. This is where initiates, mystics, and sages have always worked. Not because they escaped humanity, but because they integrated it. The initiatory system respected this staircase. It never dragged anyone upward. It waited, because to hand a truth to a level that can't receive it is not generosity. It is harm, which leads to an uncomfortable question. If perception depends on inner development, what level of awareness is being encouraged today? And who benefits from keeping it there? The guardian of the threshold. There comes a moment when the path narrows. Not outwardly, nothing dramatic announces it, but inwardly, everything tightens. The familiar ways of thinking begin to fail. The old motivations lose their flavor. What once felt like progress suddenly feels like repetition. This is where the initiatory traditions placed a figure so consistent across cultures that it can only be archetypal, the guardian of the threshold. This guardian is not a monster waiting to be defeated. It is a function, a mirror that reflects everything unresolved: fear of losing identity, attachment to status, the quiet addiction to approval, the belief that comfort is safety. At this stage, the seeker often expects revelation and instead meets resistance. Life grows heavy. Relationships strain, doubt sharpens. The mind searches for exits. Myths describe this guardian as a beast, an angel with a flaming sword, a riddle-speaking gatekeeper. Psychology recognizes it as the shadow, the sum of traits, impulses, and memories the conscious self has avoided. Carl Jung warned that what is not made conscious will be lived as fate. The guardian stands precisely at that boundary. There is a Sufi tale of a traveler who reached the gate of a hidden city and was asked a single question: "What have you brought to offer?" The traveler listed his knowledge, his sacrifices, his years of seeking. The gate remained closed. Only when he answered, exhausted, "Nothing," did the gate open. Not because emptiness was rewarded, but because honesty had finally replaced performance. Psychological insight. The ego survives by identification. It needs roles, stories, and comparisons to exist. The threshold threatens this structure. Crossing it does not mean becoming nothing. It means ceasing to pretend. This is why the guardian feels ruthless. It dismantles spiritual costumes as readily as worldly ones. Many turn back here. They reinterpret the difficulty as failure, injustice, or proof that the path was an illusion. Others distract themselves with new teachings, new labels, new communities, anything to avoid the confrontation. Yet, the guardian does not pursue. It waits, patient, exact. Those who remain discover something unexpected. The guardian does not attack when faced directly. It clarifies. It reveals where intention is mixed, where humility is performative, where the desire for transformation is entangled with the desire to be special. Nothing is condemned. Everything is exposed. When the seeker stops negotiating and begins to listen, a shift occurs. The struggle loses its edge. The resistance turns instructive. The guardian, once feared, is recognized as a custodian, not of secrets, but of readiness. And in that recognition, a quiet truth emerges. No one is kept out of the inner sanctum by force, only by what they are unwilling to release. The test no one brags about. There is no audience for this stage, no witnesses, no moment worth announcing. The path, once crowded with ideas and ambitions, becomes strangely quiet. This is the test that never appears in myths as triumph, because it offers nothing that can be displayed. It asks for something subtler and far more difficult: consistency without recognition. After the threshold, the seeker often expects clarity to arrive fully formed. Instead, life presents ordinary days weighted with unusual demands. Old patterns attempt to return, not as enemies, but as familiar comforts. Fatigue sets in. The question shifts from, "Do I believe this?" to, "Can I live this when no one is watching?" A teaching attributed to a wandering monk tells of a disciple who asked how to know if he had progressed. The monk replied, "When praise no longer feeds you and criticism no longer wounds you, you have begun." This stage tests exactly that. It removes the emotional fuel that once powered effort. Without applause or urgency, only sincerity remains. Psychological insight. Much of human behavior is sustained by feedback loops. Reward, approval, fear of rejection. When those loops are interrupted, motivation collapses unless it has been rooted elsewhere. This is why many abandon inner work at this point. The nervous system is no longer bribed. What remains must be chosen deliberately. Some experience this phase as loneliness, others as doubt. Still others as a dullness they mistake for stagnation. Yet something precise is happening. The personality is being weaned from external validation. The inner compass is being calibrated. Like a muscle adjusting to a new load, the psyche protests. Not because the direction is wrong, but because it is unfamiliar. There is a story of a lamp that burned brightly only when crowds gathered. Alone, it dimmed. An old keeper adjusted the wick until it learned to burn steadily, regardless of who was present. Only then was it trusted to light the road. This is the work few discuss because it offers no dramatic markers, no visions, no titles, no sudden powers. Just alignment practiced in small, unremarkable choices. Speaking truth when silence would be easier. Acting ethically when shortcuts tempt. Maintaining awareness when distraction beckons. The initiate begins to realize that transformation is not maintained by intensity, but by fidelity. By returning, again and again, to the same inner posture. Presence, honesty, attention, and slowly, without ceremony, something stabilizes. The seeker no longer needs to prove sincerity. It expresses itself naturally. The path stops feeling like effort and begins to feel like orientation, which raises the next unsettling realization. If this stage strips away performance and reward, how many paths are built entirely on keeping them in place? False initiation, prestige, power, and spiritual costume. Wherever there is genuine transformation, there will also be imitation. It is easier to copy the appearance of awakening than to endure its demands. This is how false initiation takes shape. Not as deception imposed from outside, but as a compromise welcomed from within. At this stage, the seeker becomes vulnerable in a new way. Having tasted depth, they may begin to crave confirmation. Titles, ranks, symbols of attainment appear seductive, not because they are evil, but because they promise relief from uncertainty. A badge feels safer than silence. A hierarchy feels reassuring after the ego has been shaken. There is a cautionary tale of a man who donned the robes of a sage and rang a bell wherever he walked. Crowds gathered. He spoke confidently. Yet, when asked a simple question about compassion, he grew angry. The bell was loud, but the center was hollow. True initiation does not amplify the voice. It steadies it. Psychological insight. Humans are easily influenced by signals of authority. Research into persuasion shows that confidence, status markers, and ritual can override discernment. The mind mistakes certainty for truth. This is why spiritual systems that emphasize rank, secrecy for prestige, or obedience to personalities tend to replicate the same power structures they claim to transcend. False initiation offers identity Without integration, it allows one to feel advanced without becoming accountable. The language sounds elevated, but the behavior remains unchanged. Ethics become negotiable. Humility becomes a performance. The inner work stalls while the outer image expands. This is not always intentional. Many step into these costumes sincerely, hoping structure will complete what discipline has not. But the effect is the same. Growth freezes. Questions are discouraged. Doubt is reframed as weakness. The guardian has been bypassed, not passed. Quiet marker distinguishes the real from the false. Authentic initiation simplifies. It reduces the need to convince. It sharpens responsibility rather than dispersing it. Those who walk it become less interested in being followed and more committed to being accurate. At this point, discernment becomes essential, not suspicion, but clarity. The seeker learns to observe not what is claimed, but what is embodied, not what is taught, but how it is lived under pressure. This stage restores a crucial understanding. Truth does not need uniforms. It does not require flattery or fear to survive. It reveals itself through coherence between word and action, insight and behavior. And as the masks fall away, another door becomes visible, one that leads not to higher status, but to a deeper responsibility. If there is no authority left to hide behind, what does it mean to stand fully in one's own inner source? The return of the inner library. When the outer authorities lose their hold, something unexpected happens. The search turns inward, not as retreat, but as recognition. The seeker begins to sense that nothing essential is missing. It has simply been scattered, and now, quietly, the fragments start finding each other. This is the moment the inner library reappears. Not as shelves of books or stored facts, but as lived memory. Patterns surface. Certain questions return with insistence. Old experiences reveal meanings that were invisible at the time. What once felt random now carries instruction. The past reorganizes itself around a new center. There is a simple practice described across traditions. Observe without interference. Sit, breathe. Notice how thought moves before you choose it. Notice how emotion announces itself in the body before it becomes a story. This is not self-improvement. It is self-acquaintance. And it opens doors no doctrine can unlock. Psychological insight. Habits are identities rehearsed daily. When attention shifts, habits lose their automatic authority. James Clear notes that behavior changes most reliably when identity changes first. The initiatory path understood this long ago. Transformation is not forced, it is remembered. A story from the North tells of a woman who carried a key she did not recognize. For years, she tried it on doors that would not open. One day, while cleaning her home, she noticed a small chest she had never questioned. The key fit effortlessly. Inside were letters she herself had written long ago, describing who she was before fear rearranged her life. The inner library works this way. It opens when honesty replaces effort, when listening replaces accumulation. Practices become simple but precise. Writing without editing, walking without distraction, eating with awareness, keeping promises to oneself. Each act returns a page. Trauma researchers have shown that the body remembers what the mind avoids. Stored tension, shallow breath, compulsive behavior, all are forms of knowledge seeking expression. When attention meets sensation without judgment, integration begins. The library is not abstract, it is somatic, emotional, ethical. This stage feels grounded, almost ordinary. There are fewer revelations, more confirmations. The seeker trusts small signals. A tightening in the chest, a quiet sense of alignment. Decisions simplify. What drains energy becomes obvious. What nourishes it needs no defense. And here a subtle exercise appears. Pause at the end of the day and ask, without accusation, where did I act from habit and where did I act from presence? No correction required, only noticing. As the inner library reorganizes, a final realization starts to press forward. If knowledge has returned to the body and breath, how must the body itself be treated from this point onward? The body as temple. Energy and attention. The body has always been listening, long before insight formed words, before intention became clear. The body recorded everything. Breath patterns shaped around fear, muscles learned vigilance, posture adapted to expectation. What initiation restores here is not mysticism, but accuracy. The ability to sense what is already speaking. Ancient systems treated the body not as an obstacle to wisdom, but as its instrument. Attention was the tuning fork. Where awareness rested, energy followed. Where energy flowed, perception changed. This is why early initiatory disciplines focused on breath, posture, rhythm, and restraint, not to suppress the body, but to refine it. Modern neuroscience confirms what sages observed without instruments. The brain is not a commander issuing orders downward. It is part of a distributed network. Sensation informs thought as much as thought interprets sensation. Oliver Sacks showed how shifts in bodily perception alter reality itself. Change the map, and the world changes with it. There is a quiet story from the East of a healer who began every treatment the same way, by placing a hand on his own chest and noticing his breath. When asked why, he replied, "So my body does not lie to the one before me." This was not ritual, it was calibration, psychological insight. Attention is a finite resource. When scattered, the system becomes noisy. When gathered, coherence emerges. Practices that stabilize attention, slow breathing, steady movement, silence. Do not add anything. They remove interference. What remains is clarity. Initiation at this level is practical. Notice how different foods affect alertness. Notice how certain environments agitate or settle the nervous system. Notice how speech alters inner temperature. This is not moralism. It is feedback. The body reports truth faster than the mind can justify distortion. Energy centers described in ancient languages are best understood as zones of attention and integration. When awareness habitually avoids certain regions, throat, chest, abdomen, expression fragments. When attention returns without force, circulation resumes. Emotional charge loosens. Presence deepens. A simple exercise emerges here. Several times a day, pause and ask, "Where is my attention right now?" Then gently return it to the breath without commentary. No improvement is required, only return. Over time, this creates a baseline of inner stability that no concept can provide. As the body becomes trustworthy again, intuition sharpens. Decisions feel less dramatic. Fatigue becomes informative rather than frustrating. The temple no longer needs decoration, it needs care. And with this care comes a new sensitivity. An ability to feel when events align or resist, when paths open or constrict, which leads naturally to the next recognition. If the body is aligned and attention is clear, reality itself begins to respond in ways that feel less accidental and more precise. Synchronicity and the living script. When attention settles and the body regains its voice, the world begins to feel different, not brighter, not mystical, but strangely responsive. Events seem to arrive with timing that resists coincidence. Encounters feel weighted. A sentence overheard answers a question you never spoke aloud. It is not that reality has changed. It is that you are finally listening. Carl Jung called this synchronicity, meaningful connection without obvious cause. Not superstition, not prediction, but alignment between inner state and outer event. Initiatory traditions treated this not as magic, but as literacy. The universe speaks constantly. Most people are simply not trained to hear it. There is a folktale of a traveler who kept seeing the same crow wherever he went. At first, he dismissed it. Then he grew irritated. Finally, he paid attention. Each appearance marked a choice point, a moment when he could act from fear or clarity. The crow did not guide him, it mirrored him. When his actions aligned, the crow vanished. Psychological insight. The mind filters reality according to expectation and identity. When identity loosens, perception widens. You notice patterns that were always present but previously ignored. Meaning emerges not because the world has been scripted for you, but because you have stopped fragmenting experience. This is where many misunderstand the path. Synchronicity is not a reward. It is feedback. It does not tell you what to do. It reflects how you are doing. When attention is scattered, signals blur. When intention sharpens, signals clarify. Reality becomes conversational, not commanding. Ancient initiates trained this capacity deliberately. They observed dreams without rushing to interpret. They tracked recurring symbols. They watched how decisions affected the quality of subsequent events. Over time, a living script emerged, not a fixed destiny, but a dialogue. Action answered awareness. Awareness refined action. You may recognize this already. A choice made from fear closes options quickly. A choice made from integrity opens unexpected paths. This is not morality imposed from above. It is mechanics. Coherence generates coherence. Fragmentation multiplies friction. At this stage, humility is essential. Synchronicity flatters the ego if misread. It can seduce one into believing they are chosen rather than aligned. Initiatory wisdom cautioned against this illusion. The signs do not elevate you. They invite responsibility, to act accurately, to listen carefully, to avoid forcing interpretation where patience would reveal more. A gentle prompt appears here. Notice what repeats in your life right now. Not to decode it, but to acknowledge it. Repetition is emphasis. It points to something seeking integration. As this sensitivity grows, another threshold becomes visible. Because if reality responds to alignment, then power increases. And where power increases, ethics can no longer be optional. The ethics gate. Why power demands. Purity power does not announce itself as danger. It arrives quietly as capacity, the ability to influence outcomes, to affect others' inner states, to move through the world with fewer obstacles. And this is precisely why initiation places an ethics gate here. Not as moral decoration, but as structural necessity. Every tradition understood this risk. Knowledge that sharpens perception also amplifies intention. If intention is mixed, the effect multiplies the mixture. This is why initiatory paths demanded restraint long before they offered insight. Not obedience, but alignment. Not purity as perfection, but purity as clarity of motive. There is a story from the desert of a student who demonstrated unusual abilities, intuition, persuasion, presence. When he asked for deeper instruction, the teacher declined. Confused, the student protested his devotion. The teacher replied, "Your hands are steady, but your reasons are not." Years later, after the student had lost everything he once sought to gain, the teacher welcomed him back without comment. The gate had not moved. The student had. Psychological insight. Power without ethics corrodes the self. Research on influence shows that when people feel powerful without accountability, empathy declines. Initiatory systems countered this by tying access to inner work with service, humility, and self-regulation. Power was framed as responsibility first, capacity second. This is why shortcuts fail here. Techniques can be learned quickly. Attention can be trained. Influence can be acquired, but ethics cannot be rushed. They are revealed through pressure, through temptation. Through the quiet moments when no one is watching, an advantage presents itself. Ancient teachings often encoded this as vows. Not to restrict life, but to protect it. Speech was guarded, desire was examined, action was measured. Not because the world was sinful, but because intention leaves residue. What you do with power returns to you as inner climate. This stage dismantles a popular illusion that awakening excuses behavior. In truth, it sharpens consequence. The initiate learns that even subtle misalignment creates distortion. Words carry weight. Silence carries weight. Attention itself becomes an ethical act. A practical reflection emerges here. Before acting, ask, does this reduce fragmentation or increase it? This question cuts through complexity without moral drama. Actions that reduce fragmentation bring coherence. Actions that increase it bring noise. The system responds accordingly. Those who pass this gate are not flawless. They are accountable. They correct quickly. They do not justify harm with insight. They do not hide behind intention while ignoring impact. And once this alignment stabilizes, something remarkable occurs. Effort decreases. Resistance lessens. The path feels supported rather than opposed, which leads to the next realization. When ethics anchor power, integration becomes possible, not just within the self, but across domains once kept apart. The reunification, science and spirit as one language. Again, for centuries, the world was taught to choose reason or reverence, measurement or meaning, fact or faith. This division was presented as progress, yet something essential was lost in the split. The initiatory tradition never recognized such a fracture. To it, understanding was always whole. What differed was emphasis, not allegiance. In earlier ages, the observer did not stand apart from what was observed. Knowledge arose through participation. The healer watched the body. The astronomer listened to the sky. The philosopher examined the mind not as an abstract machine, but as lived experience. Only later did knowing become detached, reduced to data points that described life without touching it. This stage of initiation restores the bridge, not by rejecting analysis, but by placing it back inside a larger field of awareness. Modern science itself is quietly circling this realization. Studies of flow describe a state where action and awareness merge, where effort dissolves and precision increases. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi observed that in such states, the sense of a separate self diminishes while performance improves. This is not mysticism, it is integration. A story from a mountain tradition speaks of two brothers. One studied the stars, the other sat in silence. Each believed the other incomplete. One night, a storm forced them into the same cave. Watching lightning reveal the valley below, they understood simultaneously. One had learned the pattern, the other the presence. Only together did the picture make sense. Psychological insight. Fragmentation increases anxiety. The mind works hardest when it must constantly choose between competing interpretations of reality. Integration reduces cognitive load. When inner values align with outer understanding, decision-making simplifies. Clarity replaces tension. At this level, spirituality sheds superstition and science sheds arrogance. Inquiry becomes humble again. Questions are allowed to remain open without becoming threats. The initiate no longer needs to defend a worldview. They refine perception instead. This reunification changes how problems are approached. Healing becomes contextual. Education becomes formative rather than extractive. Ethics re-enter design. The world is no longer a resource to be conquered nor a mystery to be escaped, but a process to be participated in. You may notice this shift internally as well. The urge to argue softens. The need to convince fades. Curiosity replaces certainty. Silence becomes productive rather than empty. And from this coherence, a new orientation emerges. Not toward withdrawal from the world, but toward as contribution. Because when inner and outer languages align, the question is no longer, what do I know? But how does this knowledge serve what is unfolding now? The new orders, not organizations, frequencies. They rarely announce themselves. There are no banners, no uniforms, no centralized doctrines to memorize. If you were looking for them with the habits of the old world, you would miss them entirely. Because what is emerging now does not organize around authority. It organizes around coherence. In earlier ages, orders required walls and vows to survive. Today, what survives does so by resonance. People recognize one another not by symbols they wear, but by how they listen, how they respond under pressure, how they treat what they cannot control. The initiatory current no longer gathers in temples alone. It moves through ordinary lives with unusual presence. There is a saying attributed to a poet mystic, "Work is love made visible." In this sense, the new orders are revealed through action, a person who stabilizes chaos rather than amplifying it, someone who speaks accurately without humiliating, someone who can remain present when certainty collapses. These are not talents, they are frequencies. A small story illustrates this shift. In a town burdened by conflict, an unknown woman opened her home each evening and listened. She offered no solutions, no teachings. Over time, arguments softened. People began to hear themselves differently. When asked who taught her this, she replied, "No one. I just stopped trying to be right." The effect was quiet, but it endured. Psychological insight. Nervous systems synchronize. Calm spreads. Integrity regulates group behavior more effectively than rules. Modern research into emotional contagion confirms what initiatory traditions practiced intuitively. Presence is transmissible, so is fragmentation. The new lineage forms this way, not through recruitment, but through recognition. Those aligned find each other through shared values expressed in subtle ways. A refusal to exploit, a willingness to pause, a commitment to accuracy over advantage. These signals are difficult to fake because they cost something to maintain. Hierarchy dissolves here. Learning becomes circular. Everyone teaches by example, and everyone remains a student. Knowledge is not hoarded, it is stewarded. Correction happens without humiliation. Authority is situational, arising from competence rather than position. This threatens older systems precisely because it cannot be co-opted easily. There is nothing to seize. No doctrine to edit. No leader to discredit. Influence moves laterally through trust and consistency. The system survives because it does not depend on visibility. At this stage, the listener may feel a quiet recognition. You may know people like this, or moments when you yourself have acted this way without naming it. That recognition is not admiration, it is resonance. And here a gentle question settles in, not demanding an answer, only attention. If orders are now formed by frequency rather than structure, what quality of presence are you contributing to the field around you each day? The great unveiling, the veil tears. From within revelation rarely arrives as spectacle. There is no thunderous announcement, no dramatic unveiling of hidden machinery behind the world. Instead, it moves quietly, almost modestly, through moments so ordinary they are easy to dismiss. A pause before reacting, a breath taken fully for the first time in years, a sudden compassion that interrupts an old habit of judgment. This is how the veil begins to thin. Not torn by force, but loosened by awareness. For centuries, revelation was imagined as something external, a message descending from above, a secret finally released, a figure arriving with answers. Yet, the initiatory tradition always pointed elsewhere. The veil was never outside the seeker. It was woven from assumptions, fears, inherited beliefs, and unexamined loyalties. And what is woven internally can only be unraveled the same way. There is a story told among wandering teachers of a man who begged for the truth. His teacher handed him a mirror and said nothing. The man grew angry, accusing the teacher of mockery. Only later did he realize the instruction was complete. What blocked the truth was not lack of information, but refusal to see. Psychological insight. Insight does not accumulate. It displaces. When a perception becomes clear, an old one dissolves. This is why awakening can feel destabilizing. The familiar reference points lose authority. What once felt solid becomes provisional. Yet this instability is not collapse, it is reorganization. At this stage, the initiate notices that life responds differently. Problems still arise, but they no longer define identity. Emotions still move, but they do not command. The inner witness stabilizes. Attention rests more often in the present rather than in anticipation or regret. The world does not become perfect, it becomes workable. This unveiling also dissolves a subtle myth that awakening removes struggle. In truth, it reframes it. Challenges are no longer interpreted as personal failures or cosmic punishment. They are information, feedback, invitations to refine alignment. This shift alone releases immense energy previously spent on resistance. Here, a gentle engagement emerges naturally. You may ask yourself, what moment recently felt unusually clear? Not exciting, clear. That clarity is the veil thinning. Not everywhere at once, but precisely where attention is honest. Ancient wisdom taught that when enough individuals undergo this quiet unveiling, collective perception begins to shift. Not overnight, not uniformly, but irreversibly. Old narratives lose their grip. New questions become possible. The unveiling does not demand belief. It invites participation. And it asks one final thing before the next threshold. If nothing external needs to be exposed for truth to function, what inner attachment are you now willing to loosen without waiting for permission? uplifting and thought-provoking. Close. There is a moment, often unnoticed, when the seeking finally changes direction. The questions soften, the urgency fades. Not because answers have been collected, but because the one asking has become steadier. The initiate realizes they have not arrived at an ending, but at a different kind of beginning. One that no longer requires permission, secrecy, or external validation. The global initiation system, once hidden in temples, symbols, and guarded traditions, reveals its final paradox here. It was never meant to produce followers of truth, but embodiments of it. The gates, the tests, the layers. The guardians all were provisional structures designed to protect something fragile until it could stand on its own. That something was not information. It was consciousness capable of responsibility. When this recognition settles, the world looks the same, yet entirely altered. Work becomes an expression rather than a transaction. Relationships become mirrors rather than battlegrounds. Silence becomes instructive instead of empty. Even uncertainty loses its threat, transforming into a space where curiosity can breathe. A line echoed across many traditions, phrased differently but pointing to the same realization. The kingdom you seek is not elsewhere. It has always been near enough to be overlooked. The initiatory path does not grant escape from life. It returns you to it undivided. Psychological insight. When identity is no longer built on defense or display, energy once spent on maintenance becomes available for creation. Purpose clarifies. Action simplifies. The nervous system relaxes into coherence. This is not transcendence of humanity, but its maturation. There is no badge for this stage, no final teaching to memorize. The measure becomes practical and unmistakable. Do your presence and actions reduce fragmentation or increase it? Do you bring clarity or noise? Do you leave people more themselves or more defended? The old systems relied on secrecy because maturity was rare. The emerging reality relies on responsibility because awareness is spreading. What once had to be hidden now must be lived carefully, openly, and without spectacle. Before the path fades back into ordinary days, one question remains. Not as a demand, but as an invitation that may return again and again. If nothing essential is missing and nothing external needs to be revealed for truth to function, what will you stop outsourcing and begin living directly, starting now? The initiation does not end here. It becomes invisible. And in that invisibility, it finally fulfills its purpose. Not to set you apart from the world, but to return you to it whole.